So the next definition in the series is Astragal, and the term Astragal is, well, first, by people who are not in our industry, often misspelled or misspoken or mispronounced Astragal, but it's an Astragal is what it is. And the term, in terms of the Steel Door Institute, is going to apply to generally pairs of metal doors, but it can be a single door as well, in the sense of an Astragal can be applied on a single door. It could also be applied on Dutch doors. It can be applied on transom panels. Astragals can be thought of very commonly in terms of the realm of weather stripping as either an Astragal or a split Astragal, which kind of means there's two of them. So the term is broad. The term is difficult to understand initially in terms of how to deploy the proper Astragal solution for your client and your client's requirements that they may or may not be describing very accurately. And when you think about putting together an Astragal, you have to take into account what is the intent of the customer, meaning like a door position switch. What is the natural state of a door position switch? Is the power flowing or is it not? Is a circuit open or circuit closed? There's always going to be a more natural requirement for an Astragal. And generally I find that when it comes to an Astragal, the job of the Astragal is to close off or to close down this gap between two doors. That's its job. It's not a security device. It's not a latch protector. They're not meant for that. But they very often are expected to act in that, more so than its intended purpose to close the gap down. Astragals are very often thought of as security devices. If you were to have a pair of doors, right-hand reverse active, and you used a wraparound or an H or a Z Astragal and didn't cover that latch bolt, or didn't have a provision by which to cover the access to the latch bolt from the pull side of the door, your customer's probably going to find that wrong. And the reason is that was not their intent of what they wanted. An Astragal's job is to not prevent lloyding of the latch bolt. It's to close that area down. A security device, like a latch protector, is meant to do that, but customers, in almost all instances, expect it to do both. So you have to be mindful of what does the client actually want, what do they say they want, but what do they actually need? So always think about, when it comes to Astragals, as needing to behave as a security device as well. And that's important because it dictates literally how you put Astragals together, meaning what type of Astragal will you use in a particular application. But also, Astragals are used in pairs of wood doors. Back in the old days, the older days, you absolutely needed metal edge sets on an edge of metal doors. Sometimes they had to be 5-inch wide, and that was a requirement of the listing or the procedures that the wood door manufacturer needed to adhere to in order to get their door to pass the fire test, the 90-minute, 45, 60, 45, 20 smoke label test, whatever it might be. So Astragals are used in lots of different ways, available in lots of different configurations that you have to be quite mindful of. But generally, closing off the gap between two doors and acting as a security device, if you do both of those at the same time, and it's all prepped for the proper hardware, flush bolts, automatic bolts, strikes, whatever it might be, you're going to be safe. Let's switch to the screen view and let's start to dig into the SDI definition of Astragal. If you've not hit subscribe yet, we would very much appreciate if you did, and hopefully you're enjoying this video. Now, let's get back to it. Okay, here is our glossary. We're going to scroll down to get to Astragal. Still very early in the book in terms of definitions. So, first of all, there's a paragraph that serves as the definition. There are 3 different types of Astragals. There are more, and we're going to go over those. So first, Astragal, a component or combination of components applied to these scenarios according to SDI. A single door, one or both, so a single door, one or both doors of a pair at their meeting styles to cover the door edge clearance, the bottom edge of the flush transom panel or the bottom of the top leaf of a Dutch door. So a Dutch door has an upper and a lower leaf. This would generally be applied to the top leaf of the, pardon me, it would be applied to the bottom rail of the top leaf. So single doors in pairs on one of the doors in a pair or both of them. You could have a two-piece astragal, the bottom edge of a transom panel, and the top leaf of a Dutch door. I don't see why you couldn't apply it to the bottom leaf of a Dutch door as well, although that's atypical in the sense that you will likely have a shelf, so you'll have to think about how that would actually work. But we'll take a look at that. Astragals close the clearance gap for the purpose of ensuring privacy. Minimizes the passage of light, retard the passage of air, sound, smoke, or flame, and provides additional security. That it does. Provided by the hollow metal manufacturer or the hardware supplier. Absolutely. Regardless, it's your job to call it out. So, astragal types. Let's talk about astragal types. So, what SDI provides here is not exhaustive, but it's a good representation of what you'll see. It does have a couple of basic types, but there are more, and we're going to take a look at all of those that I can think of. So first of all, a flat astragal. This is literally nothing other than a piece of generally steel. You can also get them in aluminum, but it would be generally steel. 1/8 of an inch by 2 inch wide. It can be 2.5, it can be a little bit smaller, but it's just a piece of sheared steel. That's, I don't know, 10 gauge, 12 gauge, whatever it is. And that is either welded or screwed to one of the two doors. So, a flat astragal. Now, when you have pairs of doors, because right now we're going to be talking about pairs of doors, you're going to have an active door and an inactive door, certainly when you're dealing with an astragal or a hollow metal astragal. So if you have a right-hand active door, okay, where are you going to put that astragal? Well, common sense would tell me I would put it out here and I would attach it here. Screw it or weld it. That door swings. When it closes, it hits against the face of the flat astragal. You've covered the gap and you've closed off access to the latch bolt. Okay. There's our strike plate. You've closed off that access. Great job. You did it. That works. That means the edge of each door is going to be literally prepped for the hardware. It also means that the net width of each door is going to be based on the fact that there won't be anything between these two doors. That's a really important aspect to understand, that when you are detailing pairs of doors with astragals, the net size of the door is going to be dependent on whether or not you are using an astragal that may go between the two doors, like this, what they call a wraparound. I believe that's also what Seco calls it. I would call it a Z astragal. That's just how I think of that.
Hi, this is Terry calling from Market.
But the important thing is that when you are specifying deploying astragals on doors, the net size of the door that you're going to need to use is going to be very different between a 6/0 opening with a flat astragal and a 6/0 opening with a wraparound, because you do need to account for this. Now, said in another way, a pair of stock hollow metal doors that are likely 35 3/4 wide, a wraparound astragal would be a really great thing to add to it, because 35 3/4 inch wide doors in a 6/0 opening are too narrow. That's going to leave you with a 1/4 inch between the two doors. Okay, that's no good. It's too wide of a gap. It needs to be 1/8 of an inch. And this 10 or 12 gauge steel, along with the very micro margin that'll be here, that's going to suck up that 1/8 of an inch really, really close, bringing you down to a healthy margin between the two doors that you can't achieve here when dealing with stock doors. Plus, it's most likely that your gap is closed off anyway, and the client's not really concerned about so much. He is, but not so much concerned about the gap inside of here, because that's just literally how it is. Now, what's really interesting about the way that SDI has drawn this is I don't really, I mean, this is an unusual application of what they've drawn. I would have expected these bevels to be slightly backwards. And since we're talking about it, you know, what you've got here is most certainly a left-hand reverse active door where they've applied the wraparound to the pull side of the active leaf. It's the only way this could work. That makes sense because they've welded it here or screwed it here. And when you have a single Astragal that you're working with, this would be the way to deploy it in a left-hand reverse active application. Okay, unless of course you had, you know, a passage set, etc. But if this was left-hand reverse, this would be the way to do that. It's just like butt hinges. When you have a linen closet that swings out, it would be proper to put NRP hinges on that door because it's a reverse bevel. If it's a reverse bevel, by definition, NRP hinges would be the more appropriate way to do that, even if it was a passage set. Or at least according to DHI, it would be. But back to the difference between flat and wraparound as it pertains to or relates to net door size. If you used a pair of 35 3/4 stock doors with this, you're going to have a 1/4 inch gap here. And that's just too much. So as a hollow metal distributor, you're going to want to have in stock different Astragal types to solve different problems. Now the wraparound is a great option to always have. A flat bar, great option to always have, but you're going to need another one for sure. And we'll take a look at that in a moment. So a flat Astragal, a one-piece steel strip attached to one door and overlapping the other door when in the closed position. Perfect. That definition is easy and it works. We've shown it here. That's what this is. Right-hand active. If it was a right-hand reverse active, we would just attach it here. Flip our latch bolt around. But a lot of what we do when it comes to pairs of doors and Astragals is we have to think about the impact on hardware. So if I literally did this as a If you are enjoying this video, please click thumbs up or like, and also please consider subscribing to our channel. Let's move on to the rest of the video. If I did this as a left-hand reverse active, pardon me, left-hand reverse active, okay, my latch bolt is going to come here. Obviously, the latch bolt's going to come like that. But in this sort of instance, you're going to need a special strike. Not special, but you're going to need a flat lip strike. Okay? Where the dimension from the center line of the hole to the edge of the lip, that's going to be 1 1/4. Pardon me. It's going to be 7/8 for 1 3/4 thick doors. So you've got to be mindful to have the right strike plate in the lock body, you know, assuming that you're doing a cylindrical lock or a mortise lock or a deadbolt. Should it be a slam latch or whatever it is, but you've got to account for the fact that that flat Astragal's got to go tight to the face of the door. A flat Astragal is also problematic, however, when the client can't get the door to close and latch. It's because the door, or likely the frame, isn't true plumb level and square, and you can't get that piece of flat steel to get close enough to the face of the door and have the latch still engaged completely. So flat Astragals can be a bit of a hassle, but they are the simplest idea of Astragal to consider initially, but it comes with requirements that you have to think about. Obviously, when you get into pairs of doors with exit devices, where both of them have exit devices, you have to really think that through. And generally what happens is you can have Astragals on doors in lots of instances where you've got a rim device on one door, a surface vertical rod on the other, obviously a pair of surface vertical rods. You can make that happen if you had a surface vertical rod and a mortise device on the doors, and you had an open back strike and a carry bar. You could very likely make, and a coordinator. You could likely make all that work together. You could have that inactive door with a surface vertical rod, because the latch, the active door with the mortise style device is going to get basically pushed open as a result of the flat astragal, and that would work because you've got an open back strike, and then a carry bar to help push it along. You really only see that deployment in hospitals. That's the only time I see those two devices. So that's a flat astragal. I can't think of much else to say about that except that you've got to think through the hardware requirements, and by all means read the instructions, look at the templates, because nobody really thinks of this flat lip strike until you've sent the strike plate to the job site. That's a typical 1.25 inches, and now the client's calling you asking why he's got to grind the lip of that strike off. Why you got to take that off. That's no good. So the next astragal that SDI shows is called an integral. This is literally, I would call this a rabbited edge, but it's not a rabbited. It's a rabbited edge, but we wouldn't call it a rabbited edge because this is an astragal deployment. Integral, either face of a door in a pair formed at its lock edge to overlap the adjacent leaf. This is nice. It's clean. There's no additional hardware like astragals applied, screwed, or welded on. It takes a lot of thought when it comes to your hardware. If you've got, flush bolts here, how are you going to prep those? Are you going to need rabbited kits for your latches, your strikes, whatever it might be? It all has to get thought through when it comes to this. And you'd need even a really special shorter lip, flat lip strike for this. It'd probably have to be closer to, 11/16 lip length, whatever it is going to end up being. So you've got to really think this through. I don't see these often. I don't know in my career if I've ever ordered an integral set of astragal on a pair of hollow metal doors. I know that they've existed. I would always think of Pioneer hollow metal for some reason when I think of integral astragals, and it's probably because many, many decades ago they were very famous for concave, convex, stepped, ornate profiles on steel frames. So a lot of fancy hollow metal bending, I think of Pioneer all the time. So I don't see these, but again, you've got to really think it through. I don't know the last time, if ever, I've really seen that in the specification, but they do exist. Not going to use stock doors for that. A wraparound astragal, also known by me and others as a Z astragal. Everybody knows what you mean when you say a Z. A formed piece of steel attached to one leaf of a pair and overlapping the other door when in the closed position. Nowhere does it say here that it's a security device. You could easily have drawn this with it as a left-hand reverse active. So it would look more like left-hand reverse active, to where it's going to look like this, and it, I'm sorry, that's not going to work. Left-hand reverse active. The only way that's going to work is if you're doing this, attached here, and that'll swing out. Okay, that's good. That's a good way to use that. You do, again, have to think about your strike in terms of how that lip's going to engage. Now, in certain astragal types, then it can be done in a wraparound or a Z astragal and a flat astragal and another astragal which we'll introduce, where they will literally, if this is the astragal, they will literally slot that open for the lip of the strike to come through. Now, I've had some customers tell me, well, that's no good. I don't want someone to be able to get something in there and Lloyd the latch bolt, L-O-I-D, Lloyd the latch bolt. And I tell them, astragals are not security devices. If you need a latch guard, we've got to get you a latch guard. But because of the way that the hardware's been specified, this is the only way to do it. Now, if you want to weld that closed or replace that part of the astragal set, you can. Cut the lip off of that strike, you can do that. You can do all that stuff, assuming it's not fire rated. You can modify it, to your heart's content, but the design is such that you'll have a slot there. A better approach would be, though, a flat lip astragal, even though in lots of instances that doesn't work really well, because you really do need the curved lip of a strike, in my experience, to really allow the latch bolt to make contact and come to the closed position on the door. Having a blunt end here, even one that's been beveled or chamfered, is not always going to get the latch bolt to collapse back. A latch in an exit device, a latch in a mortise lock or a mortise exit device, yes, it's going to work out pretty well because of the way that the latch folds back together. But a cylindrical or a tubular latch doesn't always work well with a flat lip Astragal. It just doesn't. So the wraparound Astragal or Z Astragal is very easily deployed in your in-swing and out-swing applications. You know, if you do this, you're obviously going to have very possibly a right-hand reverse active door, but you won't solve the security issue. Or you could have a left-hand active door. That would take care of it as well. Again, not solving the security issue. You know, if you were to have a right-hand reverse active door, if you attached it not here but to here, then you kind of solve that problem. But when you're thinking of Astragals, you also have to think about what hardware it needs to be prepped. So if you're a hollow metal distributor, you've got to decide what you're going to stock in terms of hardware preps. Now, for me, back in the old days, let's conclude talking about the SDI Astragals, and let's move on to others that I can think of. So there's really just two that come into play, and that's going to be flat. We've got flat. We understand integrated. Sorry for the awful scale of my drawing. We do understand the Z Astragal. Kind of looks like that in a very exaggerated way. There's another one called the H Astragal. It's basically a Z Astragal, just with the extra leg, is what that is. And an H Astragal is good, but it really is always dependent on your doors being in swing, because you can take your your right-hand active door and swing it in. You want a left-hand active, you just flip it over. But when it comes to reverse bevel applications, that gets tricky, because now here's a left-hand reverse active, and now this whole edge has to be prepped in terms of the strike. Kawani used to make the H Astragal, is what they used to. They had early on, it was flat bar Astragals and it was H Astragals. Is really what it was. And that's what a conversion is the term Kawani used for that, a conversion Astragal. But the other Astragal that's going to solve lots of problems is this. And you need to have a flat Astragal in stock, but you need to have a two-piece, which is going to be always an edge adapter, and it's going to be an offset bar. So the edge adapter you're going to keep in stock, prepped for strikes alone. You'll keep them blank, you'll keep them with strike preps, you'll keep them with strike and flush bolt preps, would be my suggestion. The offset bars, you would keep those blank and slotted for slotted for strike lips. So what's nice about this is it really solves your problem in terms of you don't care the hand of the door, because you can make it work because it's a modular system. So if we're dealing with a right-hand reverse active application, it swings out, edge adapter here, your offset bar here, attached here, that door swings out. It's perfect. Make it a right hand. If you make it a right hand active, then you're going to attach the edge adapter to this door, and then you're going to attach the offset to the same door. Two-piece. Works either way. Or if you don't want to do that, you use a flat bar. The problem with the flat bar, as we were saying initially, door width problem. If you're dealing with stock 35 3/4, flat bar is not going to work for that. The two-piece is perfect because it will suck up that extra space and is modular and is flexible. It will allow you to handle different applications. So you're going to need different handings of your edge adapters, because if they're prepped for strikes, where your lip is going to be cut out, it'll either be cut out here or it'll be cut out here is going to matter. With your offset bars, if you're going to slot them for strike lips, you'll have to think about that as well, where they're prepped. If you stock only 8-foot Astragals and you cut them down every time for 6, 8, and 7/0, then you can just trim them to length, no big deal. but you probably don't want to have to be cutting astragals down every time. But you could consider that. But so the inclusion of the H astragal or conversion, you probably won't see that often, but the two-piece astragal ought to be in the SDI catalog glossary for that type of definition. Now, what's nice about the offset is the definition, if you recall, also mentioned single door. Now, why in the world would you use it in a single door? Well, you would, because that's where it's going to be a great security device. So in a single door, you've got a frame, you've got a door, it's a right-hand reverse active, and you want to close that off. And you're going to apply the offset. Why offset? Because what's actually happening here is the door, and this is exaggerated, but it's not flush. So that offset allows it to get out and over, that offset, because that's inside about 3/32 of an inch. That's why you need that. If it's a security device and that's what you're using it for, and manufacturers make them for that purpose, you're probably not going to slot it for a strike lip because you're trying to create security, not trying to then create security and punch a hole through it with a lip for a strike. So you'll have hardware that will be conducive to not needing a lip to poke through your astragal, but that's really what that's going to be used for. So the offset can be used in those applications, which means you don't need to go buy offset astragals for those single doors. When a customer says, I have a high vandalism area, I have a high vagrancy, I have a problem with my client getting broken into all the time, and I need to slap as much security on here as possible. The other instance where you're going to think about astragals also is, in terms of them being security devices, we're going to need to think about that in the sense of, I need to clear some space here. We need to also think about it in the sense of, I have a pair of doors, and it's aluminum storefront. Each of the doors have Jackson 1095s on them, so that means it's a concealed vertical rod exit device. Well, what happens is people will insert a tool in here, get around that bar, pull it, depress the bar, and open the door. So another security device that can be used is a mullion. A mullion can sit right here. Okay, the doors are going to make contact against the face of the door. There'll be a stabilizer attached here. There'll be a clip attached here that will allow the door to lock against the mullion so it can't be separated. And that prevents fishing something in and pulling that door open. So that is a very common problem that customers have with a pair of aluminum storefront doors and crossbar devices. It happens all the time. Astragals won't solve this. They won't, because the problem that we have with an astragal is anything I do here is going to prevent one door from opening. Anything I do. But that mullion can help solve that. Those mullions can go between two doors in hollow metal work, like this. It's basically a piece of double-sided jam stock is what it is. So let's clean this off and look at it a little bit better. Okay, so a mullion can look like this. Sorry for being so wildly out of scale, but you get the concept. That can be a mullion. Where it then becomes two single doors is how you think of this. The other way that we can do this would be with a, well, let's fix that. A mullion that's just going to sit here. Then you think of it as a pair of doors. Okay. So mullions can be either way. The reason I bring it up is because it's something that works in the center of a pair of doors and can act as a security device, can act as a means by which to translate or interpolate the hardware that you're installing and solve other problems. Now, speaking about Astragals, I think we should also mention weather stripping or just gasketing. So we've got a pair of doors and you want to close that off. And what you want is a way to keep the cold out as best as possible. So what you'll do is you're going to install a couple of bristle Astragals here, one on each door. Bristle, it's really nice, it's effective. That's called a split Astragal because you're installing one piece of, let's say, 7-foot bristle weather stripping that is basically a door sweep, right? Just longer for the height of the doors. You'll install one on door A and one on door B. Split Astragal. And the shape of the split Astragal, the insert of the split Astragal could take many, many different forms, many insert types, and that for that you would dive into your manufacturer's catalog. Let's dive into that. If you've not hit subscribe yet, we would very much appreciate if you did, and hopefully you're enjoying this video. Now, let's get back to it. Okay, so a real old manufacturer of leather stripping, Dorbin. They've been in business since the 1930s in a western, well, they're west of downtown Chicago in a town called Cicero. And I just pull it up because they're a unique business. And I'm sure hoping they'll show us a picture of an Astragal. So double door equipment, they have it listed. This is literally a split Astragal. It's the same item on both doors. It's split because you've got two of them. That's all it is. Variations, options on what are, in essence, Astragals. And you can start to get the idea that an Astragal is literally going to act or behave with different purposes in mind. There's not much security about a pair of bristle door sweeps acting as a split Astragal. This is another type of Astragal that you'll see in residential work all the time. It's called a T-Astragal. You can see why we would call it a T-Astragal. But this piece of what is otherwise a door sweep, the 39, that's just a door sweep. But we've cut it longer and we've installed it vertically. Now it acts like a flat Astragal. These seals allow you to not only seal between two doors, but also to close off an excessive gap. So sometimes you're using Astragals to close off quite excessive gaps between two doors. But the issue in the Dorbin catalog, they don't really use the term Astragal in those instances, but they do have Astragal here under what they call the adjustable Astragal. So this is a split. I would call it adjustable split Astragal is what I would call it. You can tailor the projection of this, which is really nice over time. But if we were to dig into a manufacturer's catalog, such as Pemco or National Guard or Reese, so as we pull up the Pemco full-line catalog here, we'll be able to quite easily search for Astragal and see what comes up. The term Astragal is going to come up dozens of times. Several dozen times. Adhesive Astragal meeting styles, adjustable Astragals, T and overlapping Astragals, split Astragals. Great. Let's go to page 162, where split Astragal is literally the term used, and you can see it's exactly how we've been talking about it. Two pieces, otherwise identical. Order two of them for one pair of doors, and you're in good shape. Shouldn't interfere with the operation of the doors, but is still an Astragal because it meets part of the definition, closing off the gap between two doors. It happens to be a weather seal, but it is closing off the gap between two doors. It does one to achieve the other. A steel Astragal could close off the gap between two doors to allow your hardware to have something to be attached to, like flush bolts and strike plates. Or it could be something you're applying to the two doors to become a security device, or all three of those. Or maybe all four of those, in the instance that you're going to do something not unlike the T-Astragal that we saw here, where they had a piece of weather stripping involved. You might close off the gap, give your hardware something to attach to, and seal it off. So you can see that the Astragal discussion is not one that is simple and straightforward. It also mentioned Dutch doors. Let's take a look at that. Let's dive into Dutch doors. So in every manufacturer of hollow metals, inventory of resources or documents will always be a technical manual. I wish that I had my old Kawani technical manual still. It's lost to the ages. I don't even have a PDF of it, unfortunately. If you were a Kawani distributor in the 80s and 90s, you would know that you had two thick binders. And one was the price book, and it had engineering pages in it, which, unless you knew Tom Field, you weren't going to price it very easily as a beginner. So you needed you needed help, but you needed both documents. Well, Seiko, of course, probably I would think is the largest manufacturer of hollow metal, and probably by many yardsticks, has their Dutch door. They've got some tech sheets on Dutch doors, but I think it's under Fire Door and Frame Technical Manual. And if you have a fire-rated Dutch door, and by the way, there are no such things as pairs of fire-rated Dutch doors. They don't exist. Don't look for them. Look for them by all means, but if you find one, a manufacturer who makes one, please let me know. In a single fire-rated Dutch door application, you will have to have an Astragal, period. That's the only way they've ever done them, or they've ever been approved. And this is kind of what it's going to look like. This is a two-piece Astragal. You've got an edge adapter down here, and then you've got an offset bar. So could this be a variation on this? I suppose it could. When you're dealing with a fire-rated Dutch door, you'll have to literally follow what your manufacturer has been approved for them to apply labels to their fire-rated Dutch door products. And in this case, it's a two-piece Astragal that they're doing. And Seiko has names and part numbers for these Astragals, and that's also in the technical manual. We had talked earlier about the optional shelf. Well, you can see that a shelf and an edge adapter is going to be a problem. You don't always have shelves, but here's an instance where you have a shelf, but you also have the offset bar, and that allows you to close off that gap between two doors. And then there's another instance where it's just a flat bar. And when you're dealing with fire-rated Dutch doors and Astragals, you really have to think through A, what hardware you're installing, and B, is the door going to close correctly? Is the door going to close? Are both leaves going to close automatically, self-closing and self-latching? This kind of works because you can envision a right-hand door. You're going to open up the top leaf, and the bottom leaf is going to get pushed closed every time the lower leaf goes to into the closing cycle. So that just works. But you do have to think it through. Now, we did an application one time where it was there was an exit device on the lower leaf, and there was an Astragal, there was a shelf, and there was a slam latch on the upper leaf. And when you have a fire-rated Dutch door, both leaves have to be self-closing, both leaves have to be self-latching. So what happened was the exit device would latch, and I think the only difference here is that the shelf was actually on this side of the opening. How did we do that? I think what we did was we had to lower the shelf to account for the Astragal, is what it was. So the shelf was down here. The lower leaf, both leaves could be opened by the exit device being hit on the bottom. It was a GSA approved exit device. The upper leaf with the slam latch, and Marks makes a version of the Schlage B250 that's approved and listed and labeled for use on fire doors. And we had that latch into the lower leaf. So we had a gate latch prep up here, and we had a T-strike prep down in the top of the shelf. And then I think it had a flat lip on there, I think is what we did. Completely compliant. Seiko built it without any trouble, even though there was lots of trouble getting an understanding of what the hardware set was requiring the manufacturing to look like, but they did get it done eventually. So Astragals, and Dutch doors can end up being very gnarly, a tangled web to be sure, but you have to think it through over and over and over again in order to be sure that you're getting it put together the right way. Let's wrap up this video on camera. So as it pertains to Astragals, we hopefully have covered much of it. Again, just remember, it's not only what the hardware set calls for in terms of the hardware that it needs to be prepped for, but what is also the intent. And my suggestion is that you just clearly ask the client, what do you expect to see when it shows up? Do you want this to be a security device, meaning I can't get to the latch bolt? Because if you do, it will help inform how you proceed with solving the gap between the two doors. I had mentioned the two-piece Astragal before. Now that's really nice about what you would stock, because then you can use stock hollow metal doors and you can utilize your two-piece systems to be able to build pairs of doors. So you would stock those Astragals, those edge adapters with flush bolts, without flush bolts, with strikes, without strikes, in every combination. You can then use 86 edge hollow metal doors as inactives, and the edge adapter will cover all that up, and your strike will fit into that 86 edge pocket. And if you have to do flush bolts, you'll just jigsaw cut holes in the edge of that inactive door. The edge adapter goes down. You might use some pony clamps to tighten it down and weld it or screw it. And then the offset bar, that's easy to weld or screw, whatever it's going to be, with or without the strike lip. So now you're dealing with 35 3/4 inch stock doors if they're square edge, stock Astragals, and you really can handle basically any deployment. The issue that you'll really have is a pair of doors with surface vertical rods on both. What you really need is doors that are going to be a 1/16 of an inch bigger in each size. So you'll say to the client, I've got 35 3/4, that'll leave a quarter between both of those doors. Are you okay with that? And if it's surface vertical rod, you might be able to just come up with the split Astragal solution to close that seam off really well. The point is that open dialogue with the customer about what is typically a very cloudy concept, Astragals. Get it all out in the open, and I believe the client will appreciate you digging deeper to make sure that they get exactly, not what they say they need, but what the application requires and what their expectations subconsciously are being applied. They're applying those expectations to you. Let's move on to the next definition, and thank you. Thank you for watching, and if you've enjoyed this video, please click thumbs up, please subscribe, and maybe even send the video to someone that you know. Thank you.